Henry Morgentaler was a Polish-born Canadian physician and activist, most famous for his role advocating for women's rights in the pro-choice movement and challenging the provincial and federal governments to repeal their abortion laws. Like the issue of abortion itself, opinions on Morgentaler are split. Some view him as a murderous villain, and others see him as a feminist hero. Morgentaler's story begins in Lodz, Poland, where he was born to Jewish parents in 1923. At age 16, his home became a Nazi-controlled ghetto. He spent 3 years in concentration camps and lost his parents and sister before the end of the war. He then immigrated to Canada with his wife and subsequently began medical school at the University of Montreal. In 1955, he opened his general family practice, which quickly became focused on family planning. There, he inserted IUDs, performed vasectomies, and prescribed birth control pills to unmarried women. In 1967, he presented a brief to the House of Commons Committee investigating the issue of illegal abortions.
She alone should make the responsible decision whether she wants this pregnancy to continue or not.
He was immediately flooded with requests from women asking for abortions, but initially he turned them away. Women were ending up in emergency departments after amateur abortions. Some were dying. Morgentaler felt as though he was shirking his responsibility and could prevent these unnecessary deaths.
In 1969, he walked away from private practice and began performing illegal abortions in Montreal, thousands of them. In 1970, Montreal City Police raided Morgentaler's clinic and laid charges for performing illegal abortions. Between 1973 and 1975, Morgentaler was tried 3 times in Montreal for defying the abortion law, and each time he was acquitted. He also ended up spending 10 months in jail for his charges. Ultimately, he opened clinics across the country wherever he felt women were at risk. There were raids, protests, charges, and worse, violence. However, there were also people on his side. For example, a group of pro-choice activists founded the Canadian Association for the repeal of the abortion law in Ottawa.
After 20 years of performing illegal abortions and a multitude of legal battles, Dr. Morgentaler and the pro-choice movement finally emerged victorious. In 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down Canada's abortion law, ruling that it conflicted with rights guaranteed in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Abortion is now like any other medical procedure, governed by the Canada Health Act.
Upon Morgentaler's death, many people spoke out on both pro-life and pro-choice sides. Common heroic themes were safety, his courage, his love for women, and the risks he accepted. However, there were also villainous thoughts including disrespect, extremism, and killer. It appears as though the heroic and villainous labels weren't reserved for those who identify as pro-choice and pro-life respectively. Pro-lifer Farzana Hassan suggests Morgentaler's shifting abortions from alley to hospital must be commended, while pro-choice Margaret Wendt considers Morgentaler's tumultuous personal life and ugly personality make him a flawed candidate for sainthood.
In summary, looking at Morgentaler as a hero, he was a hero to many. So he did provide safe abortions to women who would have otherwise undergone unsafe procedures. And I believe he really ultimately did positively impact the course of many people's lives, many women. And he did fight against many obstacles and against the status quo. So there's legal charges, the jail time, protests, and violence. And that's a characteristic of many heroes and the strides they take.
To some, Morgentaler's help decriminalizing abortion left Canada in an abortion law vacuum, evidence that technically a Canadian woman could abort her fetus at any point before going into labor. His many trials and imprisonment do paint a villainous portrait, accordingly to group pro-woman, pro-life, where the public actions of a man are wrong. It is impossible to speak soothing platitudes at the time of his death. Morgentaler, time will show, stood on the wrong side of history.
Although the reality is probably a lot less polarized. Regardless of your stance on abortion, Morgentaler was just a human being like any of us. Some people who knew him didn't consider him a feminist at all. After all, he was a self-proclaimed womanizer. He married 4 times. Some people think his stubborn, attention-seeking personality simply thrived in the limelight. But from his traumatic childhood at the hands of Nazis stemmed a sincere desire to ensure that every child is a wanted child. He loved the idea of a society free of spiteful, unwanted children who grew into monsters, possibly Nazis, because no one loved them.
It's a wrap.